Mark Thompson stood beside his empty pool area, surveying a recent demolition with a mixture of satisfaction and exhaustion. The once pristine swimming pool, a relic of his previous marriage and endless summer barbecues, was now nothing more than a patch of disturbed earth and scattered concrete fragments. Sweat traced rivulets down his sunburned neck, his work shirt stained with dust and grime from 3 days of backbreaking labor. The pool had been a constant source of tension. Installed 15 years ago when his children were small, it had become a painful reminder of happier times after his divorce. 6 months ago, when his youngest had left for college, Mark made the decision. No more maintenance. No more memories. No more pretending. Local contractors had quoted him astronomical prices for complete removal, so Mark had done what he always did, tackle the project himself. He'd rented heavy equipment, watched YouTube tutorials, and spent his entire long weekend meticulously breaking apart the concrete, draining the last vestiges of water, and systematically dismantling the entire structure. His neighbors had watched with a mixture of curiosity and judgment. Old Mrs. Henderson from 2 doors down had tutted disapprovingly. The Rodriguez family had offered sympathetic glances, but none watched more intently than Karen Miller, whose kitchen window provided a perfect vantage point into Mark's backyard. Karen's manicured lawn and perfectly trimmed hedges stood in stark contrast to the demolition site before her. Where Mark's yard was now a battlefield of concrete chunks and exposed dirt, hers remained a testament to suburban perfection. Her twin children, Jake and Emma, pressed their faces against the glass, eyes wide with a combination of fascination and mischief. Mark wiped his brow, unaware of the storm brewing. He didn't know that Karen Miller was already formulating her plan, her fingers hovering near her phone, ready to dial the neighborhood association, or worse. The last chunk of concrete settled with a dull thud, marking the end of an era and the beginning of an unexpected neighborhood drama. Little did he know, his simple home improvement project was about to become anything but simple. Karen Miller's frustration simmered like a pot about to boil over. The pool had been more than just a neighborhood amenity, it had been her summer salvation. For years, she had viewed Mark's backyard pool as a communal resource, a place where her twins, Jake and Emma, could splash and play under the pretense of neighborly goodwill. In reality, their relationship had always been complicated. Mark had rarely been welcoming, always finding excuses to limit the children's pool access. Safety concerns, he would mumble. Liability issues, he'd explain. But Karen knew the truth. He simply didn't like children. Or at least he didn't like her children. The pool removal felt personal. It was a deliberate act of defiance, a clear message that Mark no longer wanted to be part of the neighborhood's social fabric. Karen had spent countless summer afternoons orchestrating impromptu pool parties, positioning herself as the neighborhood's social coordinator. Her twins were the stars of these gatherings, loud, energetic, and completely unrestrained. Jake and Emma were 10 years old, identical twins with a reputation that preceded them. Teachers at Oakwood Elementary spoke of them in hushed, nervous tones. They were brilliant but destructive, creative but chaotic. Karen saw their energy as a sign of intelligence, while most others saw it as a problem to be managed. From her kitchen window, Karen watched Mark's demolition project with mounting anger. The pool had been more than just a body of water. It was a symbol of summer, of community, of shared experiences. Now, with its destruction, something fundamental had changed in the neighborhood dynamics. Her smartphone lay on the granite countertop, the neighborhood association's contact information already pulled up. She had a history of filing complaints about fence heights, about lawn maintenance, about noise levels. Mark had been a frequent target of her bureaucratic warfare. "Mom," Emma called from behind her. "Why is Mr. Thompson destroying his pool?" Karen's lips pursed into a thin line. "He's being selfish," she replied, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Some people don't understand the importance of community resources." Jake peered out the window, his eyes gleaming with a mischievous light that Karen recognized all too well. "Can we still go in the yard?" he asked, a hint of excitement in his voice. Karen hesitated. The demolition site looked like a construction zone, dangerous, yes, but also incredibly tempting to 2 10-year-olds with an insatiable curiosity and a talent for finding trouble. "Absolutely not," she said quickly, but even as the words left her mouth, she could see the determination forming in her children's eyes. Jake and Emma had never been good at following rules, and this would be no exception. Her fingers hovered over her phone. The neighborhood association would hear about this. Mark couldn't just remove a pool without consequences. There were protocols, procedures, community standards to consider. Little did Karen know that her next move would set in motion a series of events that would transform a simple pool removal into a neighborhood spectacle none of them would soon forget. Jake and Emma had a reputation that preceded them like a warning siren. Their 10 years of life had been a masterclass in creative destruction, a talent they had honed to near perfection. Where other children saw boundaries, they saw opportunities. Where parents saw rules, they saw challenges to be conquered. The moment their mother turned her back, a silent communication passed between them. a look that spoke volumes. Emma raised an eyebrow, Jake nodded almost imperceptibly. Their mother's stern warning about staying away from Mark's yard might as well have been an invitation. They waited, listening to the precise rhythm of their mother's movements, the clink of dishes in the sink, the soft pad of feet across the kitchen tile, the rustle of papers, all typical sounds of a late afternoon in the Miller household. Then the telltale sound of a phone call. Karen had been distracted, and distraction was the twins' greatest ally. Jake was the first to move, sliding open the back door with the stealth of a seasoned burglar. Emma followed, her movements equally calculated. They crossed the perfectly manicured lawn, the summer grass tickling their bare feet, their eyes fixed on the forbidden territory of Mark's backyard. The pool demolition site was a wonderland of destruction. Chunks of concrete lay scattered like ancient ruins, piles of dirt created impromptu mountains, and various pieces of dismantled pool equipment created a landscape of mechanical mystery. To Jake and Emma, it was more exciting than any playground they had ever encountered. "Look at this," Jake whispered, picking up a chunk of concrete. It was jagged and heavy, perfect for throwing. Emma's eyes sparkled with the same mischievous light that had gotten them into countless adventures before. Jake began to experiment. He discovered that the larger chunks of concrete made satisfying crash sounds when thrown against the ground. Some shattered into smaller pieces, creating a cascade of rock fragments that seemed to dance in the late afternoon sunlight. Emma, never one to be outdone, found an old pool pump nearby. Her fingers, nimble and curious, began to explore its mechanical innards. She was a natural at deconstruction, her mind working like a miniature engineer trying to understand how things work by taking them apart. "We shouldn't be here," Emma said, but the words rang hollow. Her hands continued to work, unscrewing bolts and pulling apart components with a precision that belied her age. Jake laughed, a soft sound that was equal parts mischief and excitement. "Mom's not going to find out," he said, throwing another chunk of concrete that exploded against a pile of dirt, sending a small cloud of dust into the air. They were so engrossed in their exploration that they failed to notice the time passing. The shadows lengthened, the summer heat began to fade, and their destruction became more elaborate. What had started as innocent curiosity was quickly transforming into a full-scale demolition project. A hole began to form where Jake had been digging. Concrete pieces were scattered in a wide radius around them. The pool area, which had already been a scene of destruction, now looked like it had been hit by a small, child-sized tornado. Neither Jake nor Emma considered the consequences. They were lost in the pure joy of exploration, of breaking things apart to see what lay inside, of creating chaos where order once existed. Little did they know, their mother was about to discover their unauthorized expedition, and all hell was about to break loose. The abandoned pool site was a treasure trove of forbidden exploration for Jake and Emma. What had begun as curious investigation had rapidly transformed into a full-scale demolition project that would have impressed even the most seasoned construction crew. Jake discovered an old toolbox Mark had left near the pool area. His fingers, nimble and fearless, began to explore its contents. A rusty wrench became his primary instrument of destruction. He began systematically dismantling whatever equipment remained, his 10-year-old mind viewing each bolt and piece of metal as a puzzle to be solved and ultimately destroyed. "Emma, look at this," he called out, holding up a corroded pipe fitting he had managed to completely separate. "I bet this cost a lot of money." Emma was equally engaged, but her approach was more methodical. She had found the pool pump's electrical panel and was carefully prying it apart, fascinated by the intricate wiring and mysterious components. Her small hands moved with a precision that betrayed her natural mechanical aptitude. Where Jake was about brute force, Emma was about calculated deconstruction. The ground around them became a landscape of destruction. Concrete chunks were scattered like oversized building blocks. The holes Jake had begun digging grew larger and more numerous, creating an obstacle course of potential hazards. A small mound of dirt had been relocated from one side of the yard to another, leaving a trail of muddy footprints as evidence of their unauthorized expedition. An old pool ladder lay in pieces, victim to Jake's newfound passion for dismantling. The metal rungs were bent at impossible angles, testament to the raw strength of a determined 10-year-old. Emma had begun collecting interesting pieces, a bolt here, a strange-looking washer there, her pockets gradually filling with mechanical treasures. "We should make a fort," Jake suggested, his eyes scanning the destruction they had created. The idea immediately captured Emma's imagination. The scattered concrete, displaced dirt, and remnants of pool equipment suddenly became building materials for their impromptu construction project. They worked with intense concentration, Jake using the wrench to move larger concrete pieces, Emma engineering the structural integrity of their makeshift fortress. Their matching baseball caps were now coated with a fine layer of dust, their matching t-shirts streaked with dirt and grime. The summer afternoon light began to shift, casting long shadows across the transformed landscape. What had once been a carefully maintained pool area now looked like the aftermath of a small, localized disaster. Concrete fragments created jagged boundaries, holes of various depths peppered the ground, and dismantled equipment lay scattered like the ruins of some mechanical battlefield. Jake paused, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. "This is way more fun than swimming," he declared, a note of triumph in his voice. Emma nodded, her analytical mind already cataloging their achievements. "Mom's going to be so mad," she said, but there was no real concern in her voice. They had long ago learned that their mother's anger was more bark than bite. Little did they know, their mother was about to discover their unauthorized renovation project, and the peaceful afternoon was about to dramatically change. The phone call with her sister had been dragging on longer than Karen expected. She twirled the cord around her finger, her free hand absent-mindedly loading the dishwasher, completely oblivious to the mayhem unfolding in Mark Thompson's backyard. And then Janet said, she was mid-sentence when a strange silence caught her attention. Parents know this silence. It's the kind that screams trouble louder than any child's scream ever could. Karen's maternal instinct kicked in immediately. The house was too quiet, too peaceful. Where were Jake and Emma? She peered out the kitchen window, her conversation with her sister dying midword. The sight that greeted her was nothing short of apocalyptic. Her twins had transformed Mark's carefully demolished pool area into a war zone of destruction. "Oh my God," Karen whispered, the phone slipping from her hand and clattering onto the tile floor. Jake was standing in what appeared to be a half-dug hole, a rusty wrench in his hand surrounded by scattered concrete chunks. Emma was meticulously taking apart what looked like an expensive piece of pool equipment, her small hands moving with surgical precision. Dirt streaked their clothes, dust coated their hair, and a look of pure, unadulterated joy illuminated their faces. The yard looked worse than it had after Mark's initial demolition. Concrete fragments were scattered like broken pottery. Multiple holes punctured the ground at random intervals. Dismantled pool equipment lay in pieces, looking like the remains of some mechanical graveyard. Karen's mind raced through a series of potential consequences: liability, property damage, neighborhood reputation. Mark Thompson would surely press charges. The homeowners association would have a field day with this incident. She burst through the back door, her carefully maintained composure shattering like the concrete pieces her children had scattered. "Jake? Emma." Her voice cut through the summer afternoon like a razor-sharp blade. The twins froze. Years of experience had taught them to recognize that particular tone. It was beyond anger. This was parental nuclear warning. Jake attempted damage control first. "We were just playing, Mom," he said, his voice a mixture of defiance and barely concealed guilt. Emma, always the more analytical of the two, simply looked at the destruction and then back at her mother. There was no remorse in her eyes, only a clinical assessment of their handiwork. Karen's mind was already several steps ahead. This wasn't just a simple timeout situation. This was a full-blown neighborhood incident that would require immediate damage control. And then, in a moment of panic and misplaced maternal protection, she made the decision that would transform a simple act of childhood mischief into a neighborhood spectacle. She reached for her phone and did the unthinkable. She dialed 911. Officers Mike Rodriguez and Sarah Bennett had seen their fair share of neighborhood disputes during their decade on the force, but nothing quite prepared them for the scene that unfolded at 1242 Oakwood Drive. The 911 call had been unusual. A frantic mother claiming a dangerous construction site was threatening her children's safety. Rodriguez, a veteran officer with 15 years of experience, exchanged a knowing glance with Bennett. They'd heard this type of call before. Neighborhood tensions often boil down to the most ridiculous of circumstances. The police cruiser rolled up slowly, its presence commanding yet not overtly threatening. Mark Thompson was already outside, looking confused and slightly irritated. Karen Miller stood on her perfectly manicured lawn, her twins now cleaned up but looking decidedly guilty, positioned strategically behind her. "Ma'am," Officer Rodriguez began, his notepad already out, "you called about a dangerous construction site?" Karen's performance was Oscar-worthy. She gestured dramatically toward Mark's yard, her voice trembling with what she hoped sounded like maternal concern. "Look at that mess. My children could have been seriously injured. Those holes, the broken equipment, it's a safety hazard." Mark stepped forward, his work shirt still dusty from the pool removal. "I was cleaning up my own property," he said flatly. "The kids weren't supposed to be in my yard." Officer Bennett's trained eyes swept the scene. The yard was indeed a mess. Multiple holes dug at random, concrete fragments scattered about, dismantled pool equipment lying in pieces. But it was clear this was the result of a controlled demolition, not a dangerous trap. Jake and Emma stood behind their mother, a study in contrasting emotions. Jake looked defiant, his chin thrust forward in a show of bravado. Emma, meanwhile, studied the officers with an analytical gaze that suggested she was more interested in their equipment than her potential trouble. "We were just exploring," Jake blurted out, earning a sharp look from his mother. Officer Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. Exploring? It looks like you were doing a lot more than exploring. The twins' handiwork was impressive in its thoroughness. An old pool pump lay in pieces, its components carefully disassembled. Concrete chunks were scattered like oversized built-in blocks. The ground looked like it had been attacked by an enthusiastic team of amateur archaeologists. Bennett knelt down, examining some of the damage. "These are some impressive holes," she said to the twins, a hint of amusement in her voice. Karen's face flushed. This was not going according to her plan. She had expected the officers to immediately side with her, to condemn Mark for creating a dangerous environment. Instead, they seemed more amused than concerned. "This is a serious matter," Karen insisted, her voice rising.